Okay, well, we're gonna get started with, give me your favorite example of actually working governance in the space today, and like something that not a concept, but something that's out in the wild. Is there one, and what's your favorite?
I guess I can start. I would say one that's been proven already. It's dual governance by Lido. That one I think is something that Okay. The dual governance is actually it's a type of governance that is actually working already, implemented, tested, Lindy, and has track record of actually working and not just being some tech that you can actually use. That's definitely one that is very simple and that fits almost all the protocols and DAOs out there.
I guess another one is probably I'm biased, but I think ENS is a good example of it hasn't been captured maybe in a way that many other governance systems have been of bad actors or almost bad actors sort of coming in and engaging in your space way too much and sort of getting too much mind share and too many tokens and everything else. It's a decent example.
Yeah, in terms of favorite, there's a lot because everyone's kind of doing some sort of voting with groups of people. But MakerDAO has a functional one that's really good to highlight because they've been very resilient in terms of having a good process for delegates, in terms of its approach to transparency and processes, which hasn't really been applied anywhere else in terms of execution, delegates, and basically the entire process.
Okay, Rafa, because you jumped in late, for you the question is a bit different. Which of the who is wrong and why?
Hey guys. There's a lot of energy outside, and it feels a little bit quiet in here. So I feel like we should get a couple of the different hot takes coming in. Now, unfortunately, since I missed the question, you'll have to enlighten me about the context.
So the question was what is your favorite example of functioning governance system out there? And we have Lido's dual governance, ENS, Maker.
Pool together. Bam. Hot take. No, but seriously, let's talk about this. When we think about governance systems and you think about the evaluation criteria, you got to ask yourself if any of the governance systems are actually achieving the objective that they set out to be. Now, I was having a conversation a couple weeks ago about the fact that if you think about governance, you need to think about it if it's actually a valuable asset. So if you ripped up the governance out of any of the entities that we just described here, does the entity actually continue to succeed? And more importantly, would it succeed better if the governance was not visible? Now, I don't know what the answer to that question necessarily looks like because I haven't done enough research on Lido or ENS or Maker. I think Maker would probably work better without the governance, but that's maybe don't record that. But I think, for example, Pool Together, the governance system for permissionless pool deployment and participation, Pool Together can't exist without that actual piece of participation. So the way that I think about it is when you're designing a governance system, it shouldn't be an addendum that actually holds your value to the ecosystem or your North Star back. It needs to be an addendum that actually multiplies the value and accelerates your path to actually achieving it. So that's my answer.
It's interesting. I'm kind of scared of that. That to me is we should all be using Solana and don't worry about centralization until we need to worry about it. I think that every token-based, protocol DAO would probably be better at being more efficient if they didn't have a token, right? Or if they didn't have governance. However, ENS is this example, right? Of would it be more productive without a DAO? Well, I think probably not, because it was a pretty small team. It was 4 or 5 people, and now it's 400 or 500. All these different service providers. But there's still the idea of the upgrading of the smart contracts.
And also, will they last 100 years?
Yes.
So
yes.
There's a real pragmatic question here, which is even if the value isn't provided right now, is actually the community and the DAO a requirement for the long-term sustainability of the ecosystem? Decentralization ain't cheap. It's if you're actually just looking to max profit, that's why meme coins don't launch with DAOs. Guys, it's not necessary for the pump, you know?
Neither necessary for the dump, right? So, and that's an instrumental part because you need to rotate into other stuff, right?
So what makes you think
Ephemeral DAOs.
Well, what makes you think that Maker wouldn't necessarily do better with that? Like, could do better without a DAO?
Well, the question for Maker for me is actually who holds the power in terms of the voting. And like, if you look at Rune's, for example, endgame plan, was there actually an option? Was there like, was that actually an option? And like, I think the answer, and I'd love to talk to the MakerDAO folks here, but at least at that level of governance, I actually don't think there was an option. It was like, we're doing this.
Then what's your point on saying that without the DAO, it would be more efficient if it's actually the same?
I think in general, though, it provides some safeguards, but other DAOs like the Big Purple lender, I mean, at the end of the day, they're mostly multi-sigs and delegated to friends and family. And so even things that are sitting on the snapshots or sitting on a multi-sig, but they're never executed because it requires approval of the internal development teams, which I think that Maker was able to survive losing a lot of its technical ability, like the tech team effectively not releasing a lot of features, which I don't know if it would have worked if they didn't have this DAO, even if it's consolidated within some delegates.
Yeah, I agree.
Okay. Well, speaking of Maker, they started with delegate governance, and then we're supposed to be at the frontier of things, and then everybody was like, that kind of works. Let's just do the same thing. So is delegate governance the best we can do, or is it just the best we can do today, or is it just like a shortcut for projects that don't necessarily want to decentralize?
I mean, I think it was like the only option, and then everyone, if you're a small protocol or token with like a $10 million valuation, like who gives a fuck, right? Like do some experiments, run the gambit, do 100 different experiments. But then even if you do those experiments, like maybe people don't take note of them, right? It's like, oh, it's a small thing, just a little test. We shouldn't take it too seriously. And then you look at all these large protocols that have raised at hundreds of millions or billions of dollars of valuation, and like the risk is just huge. Like why would they experiment at all? And I think what Eigen's looking at doing with some of the council-based structure is like very, very impressive. One, because it's a cool experiment, but two, because they're a fucking huge protocol and they're willing to like put that risk on the line. And so I think like it's definitely, my perspective at least, it's definitely not the best system. It was that we made it 5 years ago, and everyone's like, oh, okay, this looks good, like let's just keep spamming it over and over again.
For me, I wouldn't say that delegation itself is bad. It's like, how do you use it? The thing is, like, you can have DAOs that are multi-body, like that have several components that you attach to them. And delegation, or like the delegation system, is just one part of it. And you have to use it for specific things. But like, you wouldn't use delegations for like a super technical protocol upgrade, and you want all your token holders to know if that protocol upgrade is going to be safe or not. Like that's useless. But there are points where delegates actually can have the check and balances for the protocol to move forward in certain directions. So it's not that delegations are good or bad, it's like how you use them, and they feed a specific thing. And then you have other methodologies that fit for other purposes. Like gauges, for example, are really good for distributing rewards. And it works way better than delegations for that. But gauges don't work for normal proposals that you would do like for most projects. So it's like how you use delegations rather than like delegations good or bad.
I think it's worthwhile to ask ourselves like, why did how we got here, right? Like, you got tokens, you had a bunch of people who were voting because we were thinking about democracy, and then we were like, oh shit, direct democracy doesn't actually work. I guess there's a reason why the US and every other nation uses representative democracy, and we like assign people. And we're like, okay, cool, let's do that. But at the end of the day, like delegation is basically like we figured out how to carve one of the tip of an arrow with stone, and we're like, is this the end game? I'm like, well, definitely not. But we just got to the first type of technology to be able to participate in governance. Now, I do think that we did kind of move backwards in some ways, because if you think about delegation, and direct democracy participation through voting, so let's couple those specifically together, are one of many consensus mechanisms. And we're in blockchain, where the entire research is based on what are great consensus mechanisms, and we kind of threw away a lot of the work on all the different types of consensus mechanisms and just went back to voting with delegation. So I guess my answer is, if it makes sense why we got here. Also, regulation pressure, trademark. That there's not a lot of other options, but I do think that it's a bit of a lack of imagination on our part to actually just look at the research that has been done and look at the consensus mechanisms that exist and ask ourselves, okay, why are we using delegation with direct democracy as a primary consensus mechanism? Is it just because we actually don't govern the protocol at all, and the protocol upgrades are actually managed by a multi-sig in most situations, and the fact that we're just voting on where to send tokens? Well, I guess maybe, but it feels like we're taking a hammer and we're saying, oh my God, this is incredible. We have a hammer and it's on chain. Let's hammer everything, and that's a little bit how I feel about it.
I mean, in general, delegation it's an immediate fix for the big issue of users not interacting with your DAO. Voter apathy and low voter turnout is a killer for DAOs. The problem, though, happens with delegation, that there's no accountability, especially because it's permanent. It's great to see a16z and all these other big firms delegate to schools. But then you get this issue where Compound has a ton delegated to Michigan and a bunch of different universities. And they are in the summer, so they're not in school, not paying attention to anything. And then Humpty decides to take over Compound. And no one's there to do anything other than Michael from Open Zeppelin that actually paid attention to the DAO. One guy, but billions of dollars at the line. So yeah, we need more accountability in that regard, and I think the Tally guys are doing some really cool stuff. Aragon is kind of helping with the separation. I heard a tiny bit 10 minutes ago. But yeah, overall, it's a great step to reducing the voter apathy and getting people voting. But then, yeah, general voting does not work, especially when you're talking about complex derivatives. And
just to follow up on that, do you guys not find it absurd that you can just take over a DAO with a single vote? I'm just it feels pretty weird, the level of where everybody is voting, so it's safe, we have a high level of delegation, and then suddenly when you take the mask off of it, it's if everybody's on holiday and you pass that one proposal, guess you getting a nice fat bonus. Where do we go from here?
I mean, if you get to that point where just one person can unilaterally own the DAO, then you're not a DAO, and you're not even a multi-sig at that point. You are definitely doing something wrong.
But
and it's what I'm trying to say is it's the fault is on everyone else there that is supposed to be doing some check and balances before summer, and they haven't done it.
Yeah, but why did we design a system where that outcome was even possible?
Oh, totally.
But I think it's only possible for shit DAOs, right? Compound,
you calling Compound a shit DAO?
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, 100% I am, for sure. I mean, that's surfaced with the attack, right? Shows it's a shit DAO, but certainly
or were they just early?
Why is everyone forking it if it's a shit DAO though?
Because it was they wrote the code initially that everyone wanted to fork.
It's a great lending engine. The governor alpha can use work, but
it was an experiment, right? They did an experiment, it caught on, and that made it meaningful and made it go. But then they sort of let that experiment play out too long and didn't keep tending to the garden of the experiment, and then it sort of became this thing that one person gave a fuck about and then gets attacked for however many $1 million. And so I think it is all, I don't know if that's just building the system that means that one person could attack it. If it's really decentralized, then maybe that's the case. Or if it's too decentralized and no one gives a fuck about it, then maybe that's the case. But I think for the most of them, we have more defensibility than that.
I would say though, what you're saying is like you are using the wrong methodologies for your DAO. Like they didn't adapt enough as time came up. Like there are governance methodologies that don't require your voters to go every single time and vote every single week on every single thing. And for DAOs that are smaller, they should be using other methodologies that are not just pure token voting with delegation, because that doesn't work for them. And there are many out there, like dual governance, for example. It scales really good. There are some point where you might want to decentralize some other sections, but initially the core team putting out the proposals and token holders vetoing, it does make a lot of sense and solves a lot of the problems that we were mentioning before.
Yeah, and I'll pile on in terms of the problems that we have is that even the people that emerge as delegates, teams and companies, some of you may be here today, that emerge from them weren't necessarily quote unquote the people who have an incentive aligned to actually steward the protocol itself, and instead have an incentive alignment to actually extract as quickly as possible, empty the tokens, and like run off with the cash so that you have runway for the next 5 years. So, or cash out fully, would also retire. But like I think in terms of the problems that I see is like, yeah, delegation kind of makes sense. 2, do we actually have the right people doing delegation and participating in this? I think the answer is no, for the most part. 3, like, did we design the right system correctly anyways to protect from the potential outcomes? I think the answer is no, and I think the answer is no for basically all the DAOs that exist today. And 4, why are we designing a system that we know decays over time and introduces additional risks, and then pretend like that system is going to be like a 50 or 100 year like solution to this problem and prevent actually modularity and participation on it? It feels, honestly, the entire system seems insane to me right now.
Well, like one of the common themes here is the lack of accountability, and I think one of the cooler things that Maker delegation has is that it expires every 12 months. So delegates have to go back to token holders and ask for new delegation, which is granted rudimentary, but it is some accountability. Why are we not doing that elsewhere? And like we have basically delegates grandfathered in at the ICO time, and it becomes, in essence, a multi-sig with like extra steps.
Which is funny because that's also when Optimism came out with their governance, right? It was like, this has a year, it's going to blow up a year later, and we're going to completely redesign the system, right? And then like 12 months happened, and they were like, no, it seems pretty good actually, it's perfect. And I think that like Maker governance, I think there's a lot to be learned, and I don't think they did that many things right, especially early on. But one of the things I think is really cool is that sort of like every year we're going to refresh this, right? You must redelegate again. And some of the stuff that like I think Agora and Tally and probably some Wonderland maybe too are sort of pushing forward is like that idea of being able to bake that into the contracts, right? Where like the delegation only lasts for 12 months, or we can press a button and it resets delegation, or like, because the idea that like FireEyes has 5 different addresses, 1 for each protocol, and we can't update it because the multisig's too old, and they're like, and we don't want to delegate in this protocol, but we don't have a choice anymore. Like all of these problems I think are like universal across the space, and like literally a button that resets delegation would solve that.
Yeah, the term that I use internally is like forced attrition. Yeah. Like, guys, if you're not hanging out with us and you don't have incentives aligned, like maybe there's a better ecosystem for you out there, not here. Now, one thing that I will mention though is like, is this type of like even delegation rotation, are we actually challenging ourselves enough that, or is this simply a Band-Aid like kind of panacea to like the problem which is that comes with delegation to start with? And I don't know. Also, delegation kind of works for the short term, so just caveat.
Also, like delegation comes from the governance standard for tokens, which is just 20 votes. And like that's a standard that was made 4 years ago with technology from 4 years ago, like designed for mainnet. It doesn't work nowadays. Like I don't know why no one is actually talking about how bad the standard is for nowadays needs. And many projects are launching normal delegation, as you're saying, without expiry or proposal types, or you needing to request that delegation before, because they are just taking the standard and using it. And the standard sucks. It's really bad. But no one is there to change that because it requires support from the whole community. For example, for Polygon, which we launched recently that has a split delegation, and it requires you to be a delegate before, like to announce yourself, and it also expires after a year. So like there is a lot of innovation that is happening around that, but the problem is like if you are looking out for a standard, there is no standard that tells you how to do delegation properly nowadays, rather the opposite.
Yeah, and on that point, like, you have also a significant problem. You have one moment to grab attention and do delegation. That's during the airdrop. There's a peak, and then everybody leaves, and like you have a second problem with like the forced attrition. Even if you have forced attrition, sure, I can reset everyone's delegation like after the year. How likely are you going to get the same community then to redelegate? And the answer is very, unlikely, slim chance there. So, like, yes, I agree on the forced attrition. And then you have that other problem, which is there at any point, how do you get community re-engagement to actually participate in that process?
Which I think is like incentives, right? Is like
another airdrop?
Another airdrop. To all, and for two different tokens that exist that FireEye is interested in is thinking about like how they can run those kind of programs where it's like, have you delegated effectively over the past in number of years? Yes. Have you delegated at all? If no, then delegate during this 1 month. And have you delegated to a shit delegate? If yes, redelegate to a new one over this month, and you sort of have like a delegate incentive month. Some of those flow through to the delegates, but the majority of the rewards flow through to the delegators. And it's actually, if you think about doubling the current votable supply in most major DAOs, right? It's actually very cost efficient to do this, right? You sort of spend like a couple of $1 million in tokens, and you can give like a 5%, right? Or 2%, 5%, 10% ROI in tokens for participating in the system. And it's actually not, as long, presumably you're not going to do that for all of the supply, but as long as, like doubling most of the votable supplies for a lot of these protocols, a couple of $1 million will get it done.
One of the things that comes to mind with this conversation about incentives is also how can you actually bake in redelegation in, which I consider is important. You want to refresh and you want to maintain like fresh eyes and fresh criticism and fresh participation into the actual proposals which are already distributing funds. So maybe a way to think about this is like, if you have incentive programs, regardless of what they are, whether it's your third airdrop or your fourth one, or if it's specifically like a program, then like maybe at the point of you being able to participate in that incentive program as an end user, then you have governance as part of the experience of those specific proposal programs.
Yeah, adding on that, everyone talks about like if delegates should be paid or not. It's a fair question. They're doing their job, so like, why not? But
I've got thoughts.
Yeah, it's fair. What I would add to that is like the same way that delegates want to get paid, so should users get paid to delegate to someone. And bribes are a perfect way to do that. And with bribes, you can ensure that users will actually delegate to whomever they see fit because they have an incentive to do so. And delegates, if they get paid, they should, in my opinion at least, they should be paying as well for the users that they're delegating to. And that solves sort of the problem of like, how do you get delegations to happen over time through bribes?
Where are the bribes coming from?
Well, they can come from either minting the token, or they can come from protocol fees, whatever. But obviously they need to come from somewhere.
Yeah, because I think that I like the idea of being able to incentivize voters, but I don't want to incentivize voters if I'm going to increase their voting power, and all I'm gifting them is more voting power and a tax liability.
Protocol fees.
Right, protocol fees.
And if you are not there, probably you should think if like that's the governance mechanism that you need. Maybe going something more centralized in the beginning, like the core team makes the proposals and then token holders veto. That's a good way to work until you have protocol fees that can subsidize those bribes.
But I also think that like if you're giving them incentive, there's a tax liability, right? The tax liability exists either way. If you get 100 grand as payment for being delegate or 100 grand in tokens, you have a tax liability.
Right. There could be a third option where you can like bump up their voting power without actually.
I think that as well is cool, but I think that like the idea of getting tokens like makes sense, right? Like a lot of these big delegates, and some of them maybe for good reason, but a lot of the like delegates don't even have many tokens, right? And sort of like some of these programs that are coming across different DAOs where it's like, you know, you're part of a working group, so you get some vested tokens over 2 years, or you're, you know, major delegate, so you get some tokens to participate. Like, I think it does make sense, you know, because to be rewarding them in the governance token. Now, maybe they sell a fuckload of them, right? And there's like good considerations there around what percentage.
Are you saying pay the delegates?
Yeah. And the delegators, you know, like both.
And the delegates to pay the users.
Going back to Maker, I believe they do that for them. And if you dox one of the delegates, you know, they get kicked out.
So something that, you know, we discussed with you and your brother was that, because I prepared a question for him, but you'll take it, I hope. It was like the biggest, like, you know, one of the biggest challenges there is you know, those delegates that we default to often don't have skin in the game, right? It's like, oh, this person is a big delegate in that community where they care maybe or whatever, and like, can you help us get them to this other community where they don't have any skin in the game? Like, is that something that we can solve for? Is that something that we should be solving for?
We should, I mean, as builders, we should try to solve as many opportunities as we can if it's meaningfully possible. But the skin in the game problem, yeah, like people vote for the wrong thing because they're tired, they're mad, they don't like Maker, or they don't like Aave, or they don't like this protocol, they don't like, I don't know, CK or L2s. And like they vote against certain dogmas because they don't like them, but they lose a lot of money. And I think that if we don't have both financial and reputational stakes for them to lose, like, we can't really build properly.
Rafa, I remember you mentioning earlier that all delegates should actually be builders within the ecosystem. Can you unpack?
Yes. I want to get a show of hands. How many people in this room believe delegates should get paid a monthly stipend for participating in governance? That's a lot of people. I do not believe that, but I may be convinced later on because a lot of people believe it. Now, the way that I think about this is that when delegates are participating, what actually are they getting paid for, and what assets are actually being delivered to them? So you can break down that question. Like, are they getting tokens? Are they liquidating those tokens to pay rent and pay for food? Question number one. That's like, basically, are you paying USD or are you paying locked tokens? I think it's important to understand like what we're actually paying them for. Are you paying them for incentive alignment, or are you paying them because they need to pay rent and buy food? That's number one. And number two is you got to ask yourself, what are you actually paying for? Now, governance engagement per se, to be able to review, submit proposals, participate, is one type of job. Now, when you pay people to do that, what do you get?
Professional administrators.
Professional administrators. You get the same thing that happens in the banking industry, in the insurance industry, and in a bunch of other places, which is you get a lot of middle managers whose sole incentive is to maintain the bureaucratic state of the governance system itself. Now, that doesn't mean that delegates do not provide value. It's a question about incentive alignment. Now, my perspective is we should be paying people in our ecosystem, delegates or not, to actually contribute to the growth of the ecosystem. And I think we should be extremely generous and extremely focused on paying for the growth of the ecosystems in which you're participating in. And governance participation should not be the primary objective. Actually, the incentive should be flipped backwards. I should want to participate in governance as it's needed and as it influences the system, but not as a primary objective. That's my perspective, but obviously, you know, I don't have tokens to delegate and to vote, so, you know, people may pass whatever proposal they want.
But it seems like you said we shouldn't do it, but then we should do it, but just as a secondary thing.
No, I said we shouldn't pay directly a monthly stipend to participate in governance, unless it's maybe increasing incentive alignment over the time. But I think what we should be paying for, the question to me, and I think this is an important debate, I don't know what the answer to that question is the activity in governance actually worth paying for as a strategic path towards growing the ecosystem?
I mean,
And I don't know if that answer is yes.
but I think that like, you know, my first question would be how much time have you spent being a delegate? You know,
A lot.
yeah, and for which protocols?
For optimism to begin
Okay,
with.
okay.
But
But
I mean,
optimism of pay,
like,
right?
like I do forum posts. I spent like years in Discord. I participated in Cabin and Forefront. I was a contributor. I read proposals. I write proposals. Like I know that it takes effort. But the question still is, like, where do the funds actually go, and like, why are we distributing those funds?
Yeah, and I think there's like two separate sides to it, right? The one side is sort of the capture, the bureaucracy capture, and
Yep.
I think like many, you know, like, does anyone work for Stable Lab in the room? Okay, good. Oh, okay, well, sorry. You know, like, I think Stable Lab, you know, are an example of like, I'm very conscious of the way that they're leaning into governance, right? Because almost every proposal was like, oh, I think delegates should get paid. I think delegates should get more delegation. And I'm very conscious of like a handful of like DAO service providers that are leaning into that, and I'm worried that bloat's going to happen, right? I'm not worried about that for DAOs that I'm a leader in, because I would not allow you to rent seek in that way, right? And so the first answer about the bureaucracy, I think it's like DAO to DAO dependent. And the second answer is that like, I think I agree with your synopsis, is that like DAO contributors that are meaningfully moving the project forward should be paid. And that
should
could be delegates or not.
First.
Yeah.
And they need to get paid first.
And that could be a delegate or could not.
Yeah.
Yeah, agree.
So something that I actually you mentioned earlier, James, was like, oh, maybe we defaulted to delegation because of some like legal considerations. And like, in essence, delegates are a meat shield for the team, right? Like you set up that governance, and like it's not a security because we have governance and voting, and like maybe they're getting paid for like assuming a lot of legal risk that is taken off the team.
But then we should be solving the legal risk problem. So like every time that someone tells me we should pay the delegates because X problem, I say solve the X problem. Oh, we should pay delegates because they are only doing administration and they're not actually building. How can we get delegates to actually build, to be builders in the ecosystem? How can we get them to actually manage and build in the ecosystem with us? Like, oh, it's legal risk. How can we resolve the legal risk for the delegates themselves? This is, I think, where, by the way, most people don't agree with me on this, including some people that I work very closely with. Or maybe agree half-heartedly. I don't know. I'm not 100% sure. Maybe we'll have some beers later this week. But I guess the question that I like to challenge the room, and I'm being extremely like direct with this, is when you're paying delegates, ask why, and then ask if you can't solve that second layer problem, because I think there are better ways to produce growth for the ecosystem, and it's the same reason why, you know, most labs and devs organizations prioritize paying for product development and developers first.
On that, I would say someone reviewing a proposal doesn't add any value directly to the protocol.
I disagree. They do add value. They add critique. I think it's valuable. Just we shouldn't just pay too much for it.
I'm saying reading though. So reading definitely doesn't provide any value. Like adding some like comments into it, normally, again,
Okay,
not that
fair.
much.
Fair.
And what they should be doing is like pushing the protocol they're building on top. And if they put proposals, should be on like how to make that better, but like not so much into like just reviewing each other's work, because like that's way too many people doing too many redundancy things.
Yeah, except yeah. So let's break down the value, right? Like where does the value chain start and where does it end?
I think it starts and stops on a proposal, and everything else is just fluff on, you know, please autocorrect my stuff, run it through ChatGPT.
Yeah,
But
but it also like human wisdom in a proposal assessment process is valuable. I think that's true. But the problem to me is it's really hard to pay fairly for human wisdom. Like it's a really hard problem to solve. When you get hired into a company, you don't get paid to be a human wisdom assessment. You get paid to produce a specific outcome. Hyper-capitalist, you know.
Have you heard of management consultants? Because they get paid for human.
I was a management consultant, which is probably why I have such hard critique about this. It's like, but I think that wisdom is valuable. But I don't think, but paying for wisdom does not produce wisdom. Like when you pay for wisdom, you attract people who are not wise. People who are wise are incentivized based on the value of the ecosystem and the inspiration that you provide them. And the question is, how can you get those people who are inspired, who believe, who want to provide that wisdom to your ecosystem
I don't think you get those people, you make them. Like,
yeah, exactly.
and the
you
thing
make them.
with proposals and processes is there's the right incentive and the wrong incentive. Wrong incentive, as it is today, is too generic. You know, you can completely pseudo update the entire protocol, and that can destroy everything. So now, one idea: dividing and conquer, setting up different guardrails for different pieces of whatever protocol it is. If it's DeFi and you're talking lending, adding collaterals, changing oracles, LTVs, you know, price fluctuations. There's a lot. Like, there's a ton of things that you shouldn't potentially change through the DAO. And so having the right incentives, so if you vote for the wrong thing, well, it's clear, it's much easier to say LTV is wrong because it caused bad loans, slash those people, than it is to say the grant went to this gaming company and it's still waiting to produce a game.
You're going to slash me for being a delegate? I'm doing all this free work and now I'm going to get slashed?
Well, you wouldn't get slashed. Everyone that delegated
I would
you
say
also would get slashed.
Okay, so you pass it, the slashing down to those that delegated to me.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Right.
I would say, coming back to the
That would fix a lot of problems really quick. You know that, right? But maybe no proposals would get passed.
And it would also centralize. It would centralize the absolute fuck out of delegation, right? Because it's like anyone that, if you ever, and I don't think, I like the idea, but I think in practice it never works, right? Because you sort of like create these really perverse games where like, I don't want to delegate to you if I think you have an opinion outside of the box, right? Which I think like maybe is good for some of the short-term like efficiency, but I think like long-term, you know, similar to before, of like long-term decentralization capture, I think it's like scary for that because I'm like...
James, courage.
Slash everyone.
So I would say that it comes back to what you were saying of getting the right people, not taking the whole decisions, but like helping take those decisions. And those people are people that are already believing in you, or that believe in the project, or believe in the tech, or whatever it is that they believe in particular. So you already have those people building on top of your system.
And they should get paid for building.
Exactly.
In the system.
They should be paid for building in the system. But you already have them, and they have the stake in the project. So you don't need to pay them. They just will take the correct decisions because they have the incentive for the projects, or for whatever reason they are in the project.
That's another thing. That's a good observation, which is like when we think about the reward and where like incentives are aligned, like it's direct payments on a monthly basis to delegates is not the only solution to provide wealth opportunities and like opportunities for creating businesses to people who participate in the ecosystem. And I think we sometimes shortcut it. It's easier to pass a proposal to say, hey, give people like whatever amount of tokens on a monthly basis than it is to create a dynamic economy where people can participate and build businesses on. The second requires product market fit, and we know that what the current status of that is in this market.
There's a cool one to point out with Aave where they don't run their own rewards. It's really delegated to a delegator, so the ACI. And they are actually doing everything, and there's warning signs on all over their site saying that it's not managed by them, it's managed by this entity that's separate from Aave Labs. Whatever you think about that, fun games, but naming. It's planned by them, and it's airdropped by Merkle, and that gives them prestige. And I think that's another way to reward delegators, where they're able to control key pieces of the protocol.
That's right.
With a timed commitment, so it's not forever, but now they control part of the things, and they get to make a name for themselves.
But it does kind of scare me, right? Because if you're just doing it for clout,
courage, James,
right?
courage.
Well, I think if you're doing it just for clout, you know, like, and you're like, oh, I'm part of I decide where the Aave incentives go, right?
Do you think Mr. Chainman is doing this for clout?
I think that many of the Aave decision-making councils are done in unique ways, you know. But I think that like the way that those incentives are distributed, if I'm not getting paid and I'm the one just deciding who gets incentives, the buddy that comes up to me and is my best friend and buys me some drinks, well, and maybe not even direct bribing, right, but just like social knowledge of who my social graph is. I think maybe if we can start paying some of these organizations that are contributing the right way, then maybe you can also set like quite strong bounds here of like, if any time there are incentives that go to this project and you have some financial interest or you even know the founder of this project, you have to disclose it, right? Like disclosures amongst delegates in general have been piss poor. There's very, very few examples. Optimism have done a couple. There's been a couple of different examples there. But like in DAOs more generally, like conflicts of interest are never discussed, which, I'm into because great, I can just have my hand in every bucket. But I think actually having more discussion around that is like...
Yeah, but yes, and I'll add to that, which is one of the things that you're mentioning is the fact that control is a type of asset that can be used as a reward. It's and I think this, again, we go back to how do we reward people who are helping growing the ecosystem? Tokens is one of many levers, and sometimes it feels like the conversation flattens to that level instead of actually responsibilities, accountabilities, control over pieces of the ecosystem, or delegated control of specific parts. And again, I think we all owe ourselves to really push in terms of what our imagination can be. When we're asked for a simple proposal that does X, ask Y and say, like, does a better dynamic economy on the ecosystem solve for this? Because if it does, then maybe it's a Band-Aid. Maybe you should still do it. And you should still solve the bigger problem about, like, creating an economy.
And coming back to what we were saying before, like, it's because you're using delegates in a manner that it shouldn't be used. Like, delegates should be used for things in particular. And
maybe the governance shouldn't exist,
Well, no, it should. It's just like for the right things. And like,
what's your token going to do?
The thing is, like, when you delegate to someone, if that person is doing marketing, he's going to take the wrong decision when judging anything technical. Yeah. So it doesn't matter if that person is actually super wise and smart and whatever in marketing. They are voting for a technical upgrade in the protocol. So their opinion doesn't
Which brings
matter.
it to the next question, which is, we've designed one-layer global consensus mechanism, which is direct voting via delegates on every piece, assuming no specialization, and assuming that the same consensus mechanism should be applied to every single facet of the ecosystems. I think that's a very dumb assumption. It is where we are right now, but come on, guys. Like there's probably far better things to do here. And the amount of decisions that need to be made at a global consensus level, not even think about specialization, whether the consensus mechanism should be the same. Stuff that you should decide at a global level is probably like almost nothing. Like it's super thin. Like, but right now the entire stack needs to go through governance, which is weird.
So
Okay, so I was going to say, like, you can have several processes in your DAO in the way, like, you can split your DAO into several governance.
Is this the Aragon pitch?
I'm not naming anything, but yes.
I was thinking I could like lift it like this, and then you get to be like,
let's go.
Modular governance.
Yeah. Like you can have several stages, and each of them is tailored for a specific knowledge type, and that would improve delegations a lot.
So I mean, although you killed my read to earn pitch in a second earlier, you had the first take. So what you're most excited in the next 12 to 18 months. I want to extend it to the rest of the panelists as well. Like in 30 seconds, what is each of you excited about in terms of like governance or governance delegate innovation in the next 12 to 18 months?
I would start with fixing tokenomics for these projects, in the sense like if you don't have the right tokenomics for your project, there is no way, just no way that any kind of governance helps.
You mean like burning your token? Because like I couldn't claim my Aragon tokens, right? And now they're all burnt. I was in Chiang Mai. Now I just deleted them.
Yeah.
Any other takes on what new and exciting is coming in the next 12 to 18 months on the governance front?
Well, I like the governance side more on the security side. So basically, a lot of these restaking providers, we're finally going to figure out how to give them money and have more money staked, ideally ETH and other tokens that can sustain and maintain value. That should hopefully enable us to remove a lot of the at least emergency multisigs and other kind of risk models that frankly don't need a whole company to be contracted out to manage your lending protocol. But it can definitely apply in a lot of other areas. So overall, like restaking kind of replacing multisigs.
Damn. Both of the answers were like token answers, right? Like, how do we fix governance and delegation? And yours is like tokenomics, which I don't really understand. And this is like, just stake more and that'll fix it. And I'm not convinced in either of those realities helping, the governance or delegation space.
He said what you're most excited about,
I
not
know.
about it's going to fix governance.
Stop being a downer,
just,
man.
Sorry. The question was just generally what I'm excited about. I mean, like, there's a lot of things I'm excited about, but like relevant to governance, I think like what Eigen's doing with like the councils and like the endorsements is like sick, right? Like that is at least, and actually what zkSync is doing around mint caps, right? And sort of like
token mechanics.
Token mechanics and like, like being able to bake in inflation, right? So for those that don't know the way that you can...
Tokenomics, right? That's what you're saying.
Yeah.
Okay.
Touché.
Just to clarify.
I can't... Aragon saying tokenomics to me right now, I cannot. I just deleted all of my Aragon tokens.
And you got a bunch of money for that?
No, I didn't, because I was in Chiang Mai.
What do you mean? You had a whole
Okay,
year.
let me tell you what I'm excited about. I'm excited about the fact that we're having these conversations and the fact that we're getting far more articulate about criticism in terms of our governance systems. I think that we are, in my opinion, we're maturing. A lot of people that came into this industry like 4 years ago had no background and didn't understand what democracy meant, including myself. And we're getting quite smart in terms of that. Thank you, ChatGPT, about how the US government is structured and whether we should do the same thing. Now, one thing that I'll mention, so token mechanics is one. And we can talk about zkSync token mechanics, check out our docs, they're cool. But I do think that we're going to get regulatory clarity quite soon. And I think what that means is potentially the return of the ICO, and most importantly, it might actually expand the amount of governance mechanics and governance consensus mechanisms that we'll feel comfortable participating in. One example in terms of regulatory clarity, MiCA in Europe already allows the zkSync association to basically prevent an QiDAO type of situation with the delegate voting. That type of stuff is maybe less silent and a little bit more boring, but I think it's going to unlock a lot of technical progress on a bunch of different
So
fronts.
you're excited for the legal stuff?
I'm excited for the legal stuff.
All I heard is ICOs are coming back. That's all
ICOs are back, baby. You
Okay,
heard it here first.
One more question, and we open it to the audience. So, all goes well. 5 years down the line, like, is it token holders voting on everything? Are all delegates AI agents? Like, what does on-chain governance look like?
I think it's plausible that AIs will play a more prominent role in data and voting, but mostly data, like aggregating all the information, looking at and generating reports saying, the last 20% of the votes cost this, or voting for this specific delegate who proposed it did that. Like, there's a lot of information that you can gather that either you would require paying and incentivizing somebody to generate a report, or ideally automating that process for people, since all the data is already on chain, it's there. So people can make very informed decisions by using AI rather than the AIs voting for you, which some people might look at AI agents today and say, the AI will do everything for me, but we'll do the informed decision with the information given.
If I have to challenge that, I would say that it's already very challenging for me to participate in governance, or even by reading the summaries of the proposals right now. And if I look the future in like 5 years with so many app chains coming, there is no way that even having summaries from the AI, I will be able to vote on them. So adding that to what's happening right now on Farcaster with these agents going on and like doing crazy stuff, selling tokens, whatever, I would see possibly a future where delegates, they just really train an AI agent that goes around all the DAOs and does the votes for them based on their convictions.
Yeah, I mean, I think I'm much closer to that side of the fence. That like, I see AI tooling as a way for me and my team to get up to speed on like current topics. I think the reason that we're and maybe like delegate systems in 5 years' time are very different and like they work in a completely different way. But I think for right now, the reason I have delegation is because it's me that's been trusted with it. And just like giving that up to a bot is like maybe some like bot PvP landscape about like proposal editing, you know, in like 20 years time, and that's how the proposal...
SEO, but proposal SEO.
Yeah, exactly. Maybe that's like some end game, but I think in 5 years' time, I'll still be the one pressing vote.
Okay. Rafa, you want to give an answer in what's happening in 5 years, and then we open it to the audience?
I think in the next 5 years, things that I'd like to happen and that I'm gonna manifest. So I want to see a lot more autonomous contract deployment. Like we shouldn't be looking at transfers from a treasury from point A from Alice to Bob. That shit is old. We should stop with it. It doesn't work. We should be deploying autonomous contracts, number one. And number two, if we are not able to have real people in the real world getting benefit from new tools for democracy, we have failed. And like I think the whole purpose of DAOs was to provide a new pathway to rethink what democracy and governance looks like in a digital landscape where it's no longer based on geographic maps of where you live, but based on interest graphs. If we can't do that in the next 5 years with all the tooling and innovation that we have, I would be severely disappointed because it's basically meant that we've kept this niche. None of us got product market fit. Our businesses are basically like, you know, $1 million revenues, and it's a bit of a small group of people sitting around a circle together telling each other how great their tooling is, which is very close to where we are right now. So I'd like to see us really move the ball forward a little bit.
Awesome. Thank you. Now we can, I mean, if anyone in the audience has some questions, we can.
Hello. Came to the panel when I saw that what's next for delegate governance, because there's been some discussions around ranked delegation in a few groups have been on Telegram, and I'm curious if any of you heard of the idea, found it interesting, have any critiques or thoughts on that. The core of the idea is that instead of delegating to one person, I delegate to a list. So I say it's James, then Ivan, then first one is me. If I vote, counts me, but then if Ivan votes, he's the third one, his vote counts if no one voted above, but let's say the second votes after, like higher one on the list gets the vote, so it'd be like more sure to have participation. Does that sound interesting?
It's really interesting for those projects who are doing more like staking mechanisms, in the sense that, let's say that you are one of the founders and you have more tokens than everyone else, which it happens in the beginning. So if you are to delegate your whole stake, that's a very heavy delegation. Basically, that means that you are giving away the control or a lot of the control over the DAO to someone else, and you don't really want to do that. So it's very critical when you have stake positions in a DAO to be able to do split delegation towards several accounts, just so you are able to not to give whole control over the DAO to someone else, but like to a group of people that can take decisions better.
Yeah, so split delegation and ranked delegation are different. This is like sort of closer to more like liquid democracy stuff, you know, sort of a one step down that path, which is that like if I don't vote, then like automatically, you know, my delegation goes to someone else. I think though, my perspective is like those types of experiments are really nice, and I think like experimenting more in that realm is cool. I think experimenting in that realm with these already large-scale billion-dollar protocols is probably unnecessary. I think we can do it somewhere else. And I think that it probably, in the current form of delegation, it actually probably decentralizes power more, you know, because then like those people that aren't voting, just all of their power just flows to one actor. But I think the splitting delegation across multiple people is maybe like a first step down that, but I think experimentation is sick.
I think we can fit one or two more questions. There's one in the back.
Spencer, I hope your question is good.
I bet it will be. I believe.
I believe too.
Oh, shit. On the topic of delegate compensation,
Uh-oh.
Yeah. I guess a quick comment, and then I'm just curious how it would, how you would react to it. So, it strikes me that there's two things that we're asking from delegates. One is coming up with good stuff that advances the ecosystem, and the other is protecting against bad stuff that's going to harm the ecosystem. And the kind of like security model or sort of the information model of those are very different. It takes one good idea to move the ecosystem forward. It takes a lot of people paying attention to prevent one bad idea from harming the ecosystem. Is there anything there? Is there anything, that asymmetry, that allows us to pay delegates or pay for those two different things in some way that's better than what we're doing today?
I totally agree. We should be paying people for security. Now, whether your security model is based on delegation, and then if you're paying delegates for security, that's a different payment than paying for governance participation, is how I think about it. They're just different things. Now, I also think it's highly inefficient to pay a lot of people if your security model depends on a lot of people paying attention for a long period of time. So if it's about system security, I would also say, yes, maybe it's a good use of funds, and are there better ways that we can innovate security that don't require that where those funds can be allocated, where we're not dependent on attention, because paying for attention is a losing game, and the auctioning process for that attention is going to get even more intense over the forever.
What I would question is like if it's not only for efficiency, but like paying delegates for security. I would argue that it is not even it's not secure. It does a little bit. I'm not saying that it doesn't, but relying on delegates to pick up all the proposals, on technical proposals to see if they are safe or not, I would argue that's a bad idea. And you should have something that is more focused on tailor to pick up those issues, and that's probably not delegates.
And you should definitely be paying a security council or a veto council or an anti-capture council. Like all of these things are specific jobs with specific requirements. That to me makes sense.
So we can slash those then. So.
We can definitely slash those. Yeah. I'm in support of that.
Yeah, I think separating that security and modularizing governance is a much better model, although complicated because everything is already deployed, and how do you upgrade it? But if you're able to have generic ideas that you vote on, like brand guidelines, sure, put up a vote. But if you are voting on a new collateral, maybe that's 2 layers down, and those 2 layers down, there's a few more checks and balances, maybe a little bit of slashing, and maybe some rewards. I think the coolest one is Beefy. Beefy Finance, they do yield farming, and they set up their incentive model to give 10% of the all of the earnings that the DAO makes to whoever deploys the vault. That's pretty neat because
exactly. That's the type of thing that it gets me really excited about, seeing that interplay between the contribution to the ecosystem and then the value of that contribution flowing back to the people who are driving that forward.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because at the end of the day, your incentive, if you're a very active guy and you keep up with base and you launch every single pool Aerodrome launches and it does well, you're going to be making a lot of cash long term.
And you did a lot of work.
Yeah.
Okay. Final question. Anyone?
Here.
Laura.
Hello. Rafa, you mentioned having people that are builders be the ones that participate in governance in these ecosystems, right? Like if you produce certain value, if you have a product that is growing the ecosystem, supporting, bringing more people in, more users, then those are the type of people that you would want to have participating in governance. But I don't know about you, but I've talked to a lot of builders in different ecosystems, and they care zero about governance. They are more focused on pushing their products, finding product market fit, getting users. They don't really want to participate in governance. There's been several failed attempts of pulling them into governance, So how do you put that into, like, how do you reconcile that where they are actually not, not only not incentivized, because they actually get the money to do that. They get the tokens from the protocols, but their interest is in getting to product market fit.
Yeah, and I agree, which is why we have a problem with delegate governance and the fact that people need to participate in it.
You think? Keep going.
Yeah. So yes, I agree with you. Number one. Number two, I also think it's important to untangle the assumption. The builder is not necessarily the one that needs to participate in governance. It's the builder aligned person that actually is aligned with them, so that value flows. It's in the interest. It should be. I mean, I would say, the builder should want governance to protect the ecosystem. Therefore, the builder should invest in governance in some way, whether it's attention, whether it's resourcing. If you think about ZK chains on zkSync, I expect them to participate in the underlying protocol governance, because if they fail at that, then their ZK chain gets compromised. So yeah, I expect them to invest in that, but I think the directionality of the investment is slightly different. The ecosystem, people should be rewarded for ecosystem growth, and the people who benefit from the ecosystem growth should want to participate in governance. Anyways, that's...
It is interesting, like the ecosystem participation and like being a builder and sort of like the scope of what you're describing when you say that. Because like I'm thinking about my role in a lot of these DAOs, and I'm like, I'm a fucking builder. Like I'm here at every ETH Global Hackathon judging and telling them to build on these cool chains and pushing decentralization. But like I haven't built anything on any of this shit. So like, do I qualify? You know, and as I think the first question...
We'll have to have a couple...
It's intersubjective, man.
It's intersubjective, yeah, exactly. And
depends which ecosystem.
And the second piece on the which ecosystem is that like Arbitrum tried to do this in a big way of encouraging all of the big delegates to be projects, right? Now, they are the most builders of the Arbitrum ecosystems as all the coins and the projects deployed on top of it. And that has led to absolute chaos, you know, inside of Arbitrum. Like one of the biggest reasons they've been so prone to money attack is because all of the large delegates are these like absolute builders, right? And so I think both from one side being like the subjective nature of like what is building, and the other side being if you over-index for these buildings too much, then it's really bad.
And this is like another example of like, you know, there are jobs to be done. Like you want trusted parties, you want credibly neutral delegates in the mix of the discussion. You don't want either or, you want like a diversity of it. I think, and I also, you know, delegate governance produces problems, which is like a lot of stuff that we're talking about here. It doesn't mean that it's all bad, by the way. It produces like a lot of good stuff too. It also produces problems, and I think when we start getting into the nitty-gritty of like why are we paying people for governance, a lot of these problems actually bubble up, which I think we should try to resolve one by one. And it's a long list.
Thank you all. It's been an absolute pleasure to moderate this panel, and now it's time for beers.
Beer time.
Woo.
Well, I told them we'd end the day with a really great panel. Thank you, guys.
Nice to meet you.
Thank you, sir.
And
Guys, please don't leave yet because we have an important announcement. So
did
I
you
invite
enjoy
you
the
all.
event? Thank you, everyone. Well, and it was a long day, full of talks, panel. Thank you to the speakers, sponsors. I would like to invite Kuria, Barit from Kuria.
Yes. Yeah. Thank you everybody for coming, and yeah, it's great to see like this kind of like events because like I didn't expect at first when I was talking to Kandu about like holding like this event, and we didn't expect it to be this big, and it turns out, hey, a lot more people is interested in governance, and that's make me really happy, and yeah, I don't have much to say, and yeah, thank you for coming and welcome to Bangkok. Yeah, it's where I'm based, and welcome everybody.
And now we are beers and music waiting for us in the hall 1. So you can go there and relax because the day is finished.
So I ordered some beer, some Thai beer. Yeah. So.
Yes. Thank you, everyone, and see you. I hope we can repeat it in next year, maybe the Governance Day, and well, and see you around in Devcon.